Morning and welcome to day 2 of the Ability event. My name is Joseph Jones and I am the Executive Director of the Harkin Institute for Public Policy and Citizen Engagement at Drake University, and we're very happy to be a part to help out in celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and also being a part of watching each of these inspiring and exciting videos as we have conversations for the next 30 days. Today's ABILITYx Talk and Coffee conversation will be with Dr. Tammy BerBeri, and she's going to talk about her experience of accidentally finding herself as part of the Capitol Crawl protest and the impact that it's had on her life as an advocate. So thank you for joining us today and enjoy our presentation.
I'll be right there. Let's see. Here we go. Looks like I can't start my video. The host has my video stopped. Okay. Here I am. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, we're good? Okay. Hi, my name is Tammy. I'm on the faculty at the University of Minnesota-Morris in Morris, Minnesota, so just up the road from you all. And I'm really delighted to have been asked to share my pretty kooky introduction to activism. I'll just date myself right away because a lot of my story has historical markers. So I am 51 years old. I was born in 1969. And for those of you who are good at math, that really means that I grew up with disability rights. Section 504 was passed just about when I was starting school. I had the good fortune of being one of the first participants in a pilot program called Head Start in Chicago. You know, I guess I want to bear witness to the fact that a lot can change in half a lifetime, or what I hope is half a lifetime. So being born in 1969, my life really did pivot greatly with the passage of Section 504. This is to say that my very first school was a rehab hospital. I went to a day school where very kind adults helped me stretch my muscles and work on eye-hand coordination and improve the impact of cerebral palsy. I did not have books. I did not have playmates. I did not have children in my daily life at this so-called rehabilitation school. That proved to be inadequate pretty quickly. I don't know how long I went to the day school. But my parents advocated for me to move to a quote-unquote normal school pretty soon afterwards. And I went to, the school in my neighborhood. And that was really great fun. The school decided right away that my mobility impairment was a liability risk for them. And so when I had to be in the hallways among other children, I was strapped with a leather belt to the top of one of those big steel, like 2 or 3 story AV carts. And then an adult would sort of zoom me through the hallway. Zooming used to mean something different than it does now. And so I don't know what was wrong with that solution, because I thought it was really fun. It was sort of like being in a video game to go to the restroom and go to the gymnasium for classes and for music. But that proved unsatisfactory as well because my access to recess and playtime was limited. My movement in the building was limited by these pretty arbitrary decisions. People were experimenting with what integration looked like. And I'm just here to say that integration is not tantamount to interaction. I still didn't have playmates. I still didn't have playtime, and I still didn't have very many friends. So again, I moved to what must have been like a magnet school at the time, Stratton Elementary School. I was in a segregated special ed program for kids with a variety of mobility impairments, from muscular dystrophy to cerebral palsy. And we were all ages. I was one of the younger kids in the class, and then there were kids in my class who were 15, 16, 17 years old. We were all mixed together. And if you've read Judy Heumann's recent memoir on being human, her experience in segregated special ed was about the same in that respect. But I will say that those were the best, the most informative, the richest learning experiences of my life. We had the first accessible playground in the state of Colorado. My teacher found a grant for $3,500, so we had accessible play right outside our classroom door. And here among my friends is where I learned independence, interdependence, play, and even disobedience, which is important. So we learned how to do things in our own way. We learned how to find joy in our own way without the parameters of some sort of embodied norm imposed upon us. And I have to say, it was the funnest 2 years of my life. So after 2 years, I was mainstreamed into a quote unquote regular classroom. And that was fine. I made friends very quickly, but I missed my friends from my special ed class quite a lot. And so I had permission to travel down the hallway on my feet this time by myself to have lunch and playtime with my disabled friends for a little while as a transition. So fast forward to about 1989, and I'm a college student still in Colorado. I attended Colorado College from 1987 to 1991. And at one point, you know, administrators and professors in my world said, hey, you know, what do you know about the ADA? There's this new piece of legislation. It seems really important. People are talking about it. Why don't you apply for this grant to go to DC and figure out what the heck this thing is about? So I had never traveled by myself before. I had never worn a fancy suit. I had never worn high heel, or scarcely ever, except for church, maybe worn high heels. And I got all gussied up. I flew to DC, and I had contacted some lawmakers in advance to see whether we could have a meeting, have an interview. I didn't contact Senator Tom Harkin at the time. I think for me in Colorado, Bob Dole had a higher public profile, and so I contacted his office, and I had some other interviews throughout a single day that I was going to be in DC. And I don't know how I did it, but I made it to the Capitol by myself, probably in a cab, and I showed up for my meetings, and nobody was available to see me. No, I mean, nobody. Everybody canceled. Everybody was kind of cagey about it. It was a really strange experience, of my first direct experience of government, besides actually voting for the first time. And I just didn't know what to do with all of that. But one of Bob Dole's aides said, you know, Senator Dole isn't available right now, but I can chat with you. And he did an interview that was like really nervous and kind of lukewarm and not super informative. I don't know what was going on. So I was kind of disappointed, and I didn't really learn very much. And I just remember so distinctly leaving that meeting and with kind of a swell of disappointment in my heart, and being under the Capitol Rotunda, which is of course round, and I recall it being surrounded by a bunch of closed doors. And I'm slipping and sliding on all this marble. I mean, it's getting really hard to get around. The floors are dry, but they're very slippery marble. Again, I'm wearing high heels, which I will never do again, not as an activist, not as a scholar. And I just was like very perplexed. I didn't know which door I had come in, and I didn't know which door to go out. So I just wanted to be back on concrete. And I just made a beeline for the closest door and pushed it open. And, you know, I had gone out the other side, and I found a huge political rally. It was March 12th, 1990. I had no prior awareness that this rally was going to happen. I had very little awareness of national level activism. I knew about the ADAPT chapter in Denver, which was really pretty extraordinary. I knew about that from our local paper, but I really did not have any framework for understanding what I was seeing. I just saw a ton of bodies with lots of orthopedic paraphernalia and smiles, and there was singing, and there was lots of carousing at the bottom of around 89 steps. And so I turned around to go back inside because I was like, dressed for something different and had different expectations of this day. And of course, the door had closed behind me and locked because, in fact, government officials, the rally made people very nervous. If you know anything about the Capitol crawl, many activists decided that it would be very symbolic and meaningful to climb the Capitol steps as an expression of an inaccessible federal government. And so, I mean, that was extremely moving, right? There were people getting out of their chairs and just crawling up the steps to demonstrate how difficult public accessibility was at the time, and I have to say, remains today in many places. And so, so I'm still at the top of the steps, and I can't get back inside, and I'm just watching this kind of beauty and solidarity unfold below me. And I think, well, I'll just go down and see what's up. Maybe I can talk to some of them. So I start down the steps, you know, and everybody thinks that I'm also making a symbolic gesture. I wasn't. I was very blessed to be there, and I realized that by then. But I really was just trying to get down the steps, and everybody started cheering for me because they thought that I was also making a symbolic gesture from the top. And, you know, I spent the rest of the afternoon on a bright, beautiful, warm day, March of 1990, with people who I now realize, you know, shaped and continue to shape the agenda for this nation around disability, civil rights. And I feel so blessed to have had that lesson. You know, it's really important for me to think about we're all part of history every day. History is being made every day, and history either happens to you or you make it yourself. And I think for me, that was just a really important lesson. I have spent most of my life as a teacher. My special ed teacher in particular had an extraordinary impact on me. And since that time, I have wanted to be a teacher. I've spent most of my time sort of being an activist in the classroom. And I hope through some lessons, making history vicariously. I think one of the other lessons that I learned is that efforts for greater justice are continuous, ongoing. They are also contiguous. It's well known by now that the Black Panthers were a tremendous support to the disability rights movement when Section 504 was passed and beyond, and we owe it to our forebearers to continue to work in solidarity with other movements, because I think when we take common cause for these issues of social justice, we are unbeatable in number and in force. You know, and I think it's important to point out the next day too, though, that I was studying a lot of languages in college, and I didn't really see myself working in disability activism or disability studies for the rest of my life at that time. And in fact, now I'm a French professor. But one of the things I had also set up was an interview with someone at the Department of Defense. And the next day I went to that interview. It was just an informational interview about, you know, what it takes to become a linguist for the federal government and what kinds of languages I should pursue and what kinds of academic programs and graduate school. And the person I interviewed, whose name I don't remember, at the Department of Defense said, Tammy, the Department of Defense doesn't hire people like you. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, did you watch the local news last night? And I said, no, I didn't. I'm sorry, I was visiting. I was spending time with the friends that I'm staying with. And I had been on the national news. The Capitol crawl had been on the local news. And, it was very upsetting to this representative from the Department of Defense that I had been part of this dissident rally. And so that's okay. I decided over time that the Department of Defense was not a good cultural fit for me, and that worked out fine. But it was very interesting to me what I felt in that space as a disabled person versus how it was perceived by what a lot of scholars would call normmates inside the building. What I felt was extraordinary joy and solidarity and possibility. Others felt tremendously threatened by that activism. So I'm not aware of this this format. I'm only number 2, and so I don't know if there are questions now. That's what I have to say about my own experiences in the disability rights movement and my efforts to bring that spirit into my classroom through the ways I structure assignments, the ways I help students realize and actualize their intellect and their identities and their capacities for justice. So thank you very much for listening.
Hi, Tammy. Thank you so much. Amy's
Hi.
on here too. We just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story.
Sure. It was a little bit shorter than I thought it would be.
Which is just fine. And so I think at this time with our participants, if there are any questions and answer or questions for Tammy that we would like to add on, please feel free to submit a question. If we can turn on the Q&A in the chat again, please. Dr. Knopf, please, would you share a comment? Oh,
I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you very much for chatting with us today. It's just day 2, so we're still getting a hang of having captions and interpreters and getting people to log on. So we appreciate all of our attendees for being patient with us. And thank you so much for being here this morning and sharing your story with us.
Sure. Thank you.
And Tammy, I have a group of participants here who are young deaf Chinese interns with us. And I think it would be great if you could just share some advice to young people who want to be change agents and promote disability advocacy, either in the United States or in the country that they're from.
Sure. I have a lot of sort of in a parallel universe. I've done a lot of traveling, especially to France and Italy. And kind of another thread of my story is just what happens to your sense of yourself when you travel and how disability and other aspects of identity, France and the US are very similar in a lot of ways. France is more fun, but I mean, other than that, France and the US are very similar. And, it's tremendously insightful and beneficial to go to a new place and to gain an understanding that disability is cultural, that there is there is something maybe inbuilt about impairment or chronic illness or whatever conditions we manage every day, but there is nothing inbuilt about the way disability is understood. And it was tremendously beneficial to me to travel to France. The first reason is sort of basic, just that shift in perception. And I've traveled to Asia, I've traveled in a lot of places in Europe, and that shift in self-understanding propelled a lot of very good critical thinking for me, and intellectual development and interest in other people's. The second thing is that the first time I went to France, again, same trajectory as in the US. I was not allowed to leave the tour bus. I was a liability for the program. And so I go back to France every couple of years with great regularity. And every time I go back, it's better and better. And I have a couple of stories that just suggest astonishing social change in a very short period of time in France, and great public awareness of equity and dignity and fun. One of the things that happened in Paris while I was kind of leapfrogging back and forth every couple of years is that Parisians discovered wheels while I was discovering wheels. So they gained a public bike program, they discovered rollerblading, and they do rollerblading across the city every Friday night. And suddenly all of my paraphernalia just looked like sporting equipment. And, you know, this one summer we went back and I was pregnant and I had a 4-year-old, and my husband built this wheelchair. He took a regular manual chair and he extended the handles and he built a little sling for my toddler with a kick plate so that my toddler could stand on the kick plate when he was awake, and he could kind of be above my head, you know, rolling with dad behind him pushing. And then when he got tired and needed a nap, he could lean back into the sling and go to sleep. And I remember it was really powerful one day when we were just walking through Paris, and this guy on a bike nearly had an accident because he turned around and he said, "You're so cool." You know, and so suddenly we were like, you know, hip on wheels, basically, which was extraordinary. And another time, the same trip actually, at another moment, we were staying on the 5th floor of an apartment in an Airbnb. And of course the elevator broke. Like, European elevators are a cliche. And like, one of the cliches about French culture is that they're rarely in a hurry. And so I was like grumpy Tammy, like, oh, they're never going to fix the elevator. I'm going to be crawling up these stairs forever, you know, all month. And this guy, this permanent tenant in the building, zipped around me on the steps and said, "Oh, I'll call him for you." And you know, I said, "Oh yeah, that's okay. It won't be fixed. It's all right." And he said, "Yes, it will." And he took every permanent tenant in that building down to the elevator repair shop and demanded, he said, "We're not leaving until you go fix the elevator for this renter in our building who needs it." And so my advice to your travelers is that you don't know what you don't know. You don't know, you never know what you don't know. And the best way to move through the world is to be open to new ideas and people who want to support you in ways that might not feel as familiar. That kind of solidarity, I'm familiar with it because I've studied France for a long time, but it's not something I've experienced very often in the US. Certainly kindness from lots of people, certainly individual solidarity, but somebody taking half a day off to move a whole building full of tenants downtown to make demands on a company, that is uniquely French. And he pointed that out. He said, "You know how we love to protest." I said, "Yes, I do." Yes, I do.
They still do. Yes.
Yeah.
We were just
So
last year. Yeah.
So I think being open to what other people can teach you about yourself is such an important disposition for travel.
Excellent. Right. And I'm a strong advocate for students with disabilities participating in education abroad programs also.
Yeah.
Because I think, you know, just by including the young people who have a disability is part of the process. Seeing is believing. And so that's really something that we embrace through St. Cloud State and our Confucius Institute for sure, traveling to China. And I know someone else posted a question here, Tammy. If you could answer that, I'll ask this for Christine. Are you still an activist? And what is your main concern at this time in regards to activism?
So I think my friends would say you are not an activist, you are a teacher. I'm not really comfortable I don't seek the kinds of situations that I landed in on that March day in 1990. That's why I feel so blessed that I got to experience it. But whenever I'm in a crowded place now at 51, I just think, oh my God, where's the bathroom? Am I going to be able to take care of myself, you know, in this crowded place? So I think people who know me well would say that I'm a teacher and a scholar, not an activist, but I certainly support activists as individuals and activism. My main concern at this time is voting access and voting rights, and the election in 2020, disability representation in the election this fall. That is a short-term concern. I think my concerns about physical access are ongoing. And for anyone who watched the PBS NewsHour last night, there was a great talk by a doctor at the University of Michigan who had a lot to say about physical access. And, you know, I will just say that it doesn't take a person to make me understand that I'm not welcome. It takes a flight of steps. And so, you know, he was making a distinction between minimal compliance, which was meant to be a start. It is not the ceiling for physical access. It is the floor. And I think that is a bit of sensibility that we really need to elevate as a message. And by access, I don't just mean stairs. I mean communication access. I mean intellectual access. Any way you want to spin access, that's what I'm talking about.
Excellent. And I know there's another question here that if you're willing to take a few more questions, I can pose
Sure.
it to you. This one is from Vivian. Do you have any advice on connecting and assisting individuals with disabilities with job search strategies?
Yeah, there was an interesting, so there's great coverage right now of the ADA, right? And you know, I think it depends largely on your community and on your the resources that you have in your immediate community. But I would say this, you know, it's Laura Hershey, an activist who actually went to my alma mater, and I had the good fortune of meeting Laura when I was a college student. She has a great poem, if you're not familiar, called "You Get Proud by Practicing." And so I would say a primary job search strategy is to muster your pride, practice your pride in undertaking a job search, and to be strengths-based in your assessment. If you are over-focusing on an impairment, whether it impacts your job, the jobs you're applying for, you know, the disability rights movement has taught us that disability is contextual. So you might be applying for jobs in which your disability has no bearing whatsoever, or you might be in a good position to suggest that the environment that is going to be disabling for you can adapt to you, because you bring strengths to any position that you are applying for. So for me personally, as a person who's applied for many things, I think that is an important mind shift, is to remember that the deficit is not in you. It exists in work environments that have yet to adapt to ideas like interdependence and interreliability.
This is Amy Knopf. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need our sign language interpreter to please move back because our deaf participants cannot see her. We need to be able to see you from your head to your waist. And I apologize for interrupting,
No,
but
that's okay. It's a hard question. I was going to tell her just
hang on just a minute for our
Oh, yeah.
interpreter to get set.
Yep.
Okay.
Is that better, Amy?
Yes, I'll ask my deaf participants if that's better. They'll let me know in the chat.
Great. It looks
Yeah.
like it is. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So I think, you know, to really go about a job search and go and assert your strengths rather as your first line of defense against ableism in a job search, I would say is good advice. To find allies who are willing to look at your CV with you, do mock interviews. Lots of practice is good for everybody.
Excellent. Thank you, Tammy. And if you're okay with it, there are a couple more questions that came through in our Q&A. This one is from Oana. How would you go about building disability pride? And what are your suggestions for disability accessibility offices and how to go about that?
Okay, that's a lot of questions in one question. Yeah, let me see if I can find it.
Yep, in the Q&A, you can see the questions that are popping up.
Oh, Q&A, okay. Yep, okay. Let's see. How would you go about building disability pride, and what are your suggestions for disability accessibility offices? So disability pride, I think disability culture is a really important piece of this picture. I have worked for all of my adult life in higher education, so when I read that question, I understand that you want to talk about disability resource centers in higher ed. If you want to talk about a different setting, that's fine with me. That is the one I know best. So, so I think in terms of building disability pride, it's just affording disabled people the same kind of latitude for identity development that is afforded other people. LGBTQ people, people of different races, ethnicities, cultures who are living in the United States. And so I think that something that I see happening in a lot of qualitative research and in a lot of quarters is simply finally that the idea of disability identity is becoming more commonplace. So anything these disability offices can do to promote the dignity of the whole person, not just creating accommodation, not just you know, affording a ramp or affording communication access. It kind of goes back to the difference between integration versus interaction. Integration means you let me in. Interaction means you cared what I have to say. And I think that's a really important foundation for building disability culture. And by the way, disability culture is not just for disabled people. Disability pride is for everyone. So that would be my answer. I think film screenings, you know, in higher education, there are Black student unions, there's Voces Unidas at our campus, there are lots of identity-based groups, and that can only be good for disabled students as well. So if you don't have a community group, that would be a good place to start, and then building culture together and making space for self-expression.
Excellent. I think that leads in really well to a question from Stephen. Can you talk about how you teach advocacy in your classroom today, even for the non-disabled students, which I think is a really good question and segue from what you were just talking and sharing about.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, as a nation, as a national project, we need more awareness of how identity works, what kinds of things allow us to show up and be our full selves in a community space. And so how I teach advocacy is, for example, this fall I'm teaching an Intro to Disability Studies course, and students will do kind of an ability-centered autoethnography. Everybody's got ability, and everybody, it may not exactly be the case that everybody has disabilities, but everybody overcomes deficits to function in any new setting with different expectations, right? We all have a learning curve. So that isn't to kind of dismiss the idea that disability is a distinct phenomenon, but simply to say that I think it's really instructive to have everyone function, everyone reflect deeply on their strengths and the moments in their lives when they've faced barriers, how it made them feel, how they overcame them. Was it relationships that enabled them to overcome them? I teach a lot of great films. If you haven't watched Crip Camp yet, oh my gosh, it's worth the price of admissions times 60,000. And so really, I teach a lot of, Steve, I teach a lot of access skills. I think every person in the world needs to know how to build an accessible presentation. They need to know how to book an ASL interpreter. They need to know how to make accessible programs for their programming or accessible documents. Because wouldn't it be great if we could build events where you didn't feel like an exception the minute you walked in the door, if you get in the door or roll in the door? Right? So wouldn't it be great if we all had the access skills to make everybody feel like an asset the minute they showed up?
Powerful statements, Tammy. Thank you. You know, there's one question that I'd really like us to end on with some of your words of wisdom again. And this one is coming from a parent, from Teresa, who is the mother of a child with autism, and especially during this time of COVID-19. Words of wisdom to share with parents who are struggling with homeschooling, parents who are struggling with the isolation that's happening right now. If you have any advice on that or any experience, you know, in your work currently or with other families that you work with that you could share.
Yeah, I have to say I don't have direct experience right now. We are doing one event this fall at my university. We're showing Autism Goes to College and having a student panel afterwards. But as far as like COVID and disabilities in K-12, I know that that's really hard. I have 2 kids and parenting is challenging right now. I wonder if the parent has found some community groups, other parents in the community with kids with autism, whether they could set up kind of quarantine pods. You agree to a set of kind of guidelines that you're all going to follow in order that your kids can play together and you can spend time with other parents who are facing similar issues. Maybe parents could coordinate different subject areas for schooling. I think that quarantine pods show some promise, at least for your well-being as a parent, having other people to talk to, and other parents who can understand what you're facing every day.
Thank you, Tammy. And it's a challenging time for all of us, and my heart goes out to parents who struggle in their home environment, and we all continue to seek avenues for still providing that social inclusion and playmates and all of that with the young children. So Teresa, as a parent, thank you for your question, because it is very significant and relevant at this point in time. So Tammy, thank you so much. I know we have some other questions, but we said we'd keep it to about 45 minutes or so. So at this time, I'm very thankful for everyone who joined our presentation with Tammy. And we're just getting to know Tammy, and having her be a part of this has been an amazing opportunity for all of us. So join us again tomorrow. Please look at our calendar online, and you can see what all of our different speakers are for the month. We will be hosting a special session on Wednesday evenings at 7:30 regarding US-China deaf projects that we've been working on with my colleague, Dr. Knopf, and our deaf team from China will be sharing. So we look forward to all of our future presentations during the next course of events until our gala, which is on August 28th. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you to everyone who has been participating. We'll see you all tomorrow.